The moment they landed in a region, the first thing that they built was a fort to ensure that they protect that area. And also in competition against the Portuguese and the Spaniards, they needed those forts. And when it was when there were already forts built by the Portuguese or by the Spaniards, the VOC would come and defeat them and take over. They had power. Okay, next. The VOC may appoint governors, keep armed forces, install judicial officers and officers to ensure enforcement of the law and justice so as to promote trade. The judiciary and military shall be required to swear an oath of loyalty to the States General. This is very important. You only work for one leader or the above mentioned government and to the company, right? And this is interesting. If it should occur that Spanish or Portuguese ships or those of another enemy attack the ships of the company, and should during such fight some ships be captured, the captured ships and goods shall be apportioned in accordance with the national priorities. That is, shared out to the country with the admiral being given a fair share, provided that should the company have suffered any damage in the encounter, this will be subtracted in advance. In other words, in the sea, when you encounter the ship from the Portuguese or the Spaniards, if you are attacked, then you are allowed to attack back and then take the wealth of the ship to the fatherland. Well, attack. Who attacks whom in that open sea with no cameras? That's a big question. But you see the power, right? And of course, they have the right to mint their own money. So I have my own collection, please keep them safe, of my VOC money there. Not from the 17th century, I'm still hunting for the 17th century. The ones that I have is the 18th century, but it's still very valuable. Anyways, think about this, right? So the VOC was given a full authority by the States General to operate like a country. So when they landed, right? So when they landed to that region, they came as a sovereign power. And then also the authority to mint money. That is very significant. So with the arrivals of the VOC merchants and troops and people, then also ministers from the Netherlands also came to the East Indies. So that's the center of my talk today. So the spread of the power of the VOC also brought the expansion of Calvinism in the East Indies. And if you know your European history or Reformation history that happened in the 16th century toward the 17th century, you can see that everything that happened in Europe also happened in the East Indies. One case in point. The United Provinces, the Low Countries in the 1560s just got rid of the power of Spain. And the enmity between the Low Countries and Spain was not just about political struggles. It was also religious. Roman Catholicism as against Calvinism. So there was already that competition in Europe, and when they sailed to the East Indies, then they also brought that struggle. The Roman Catholics were the enemies for the Calvinists, and in the East Indies, the VOC wanted to establish power, also to show that their religion, Calvinism, is more powerful than the Roman Catholic. And so there was one big idea from the Dutch side of the discussion. They wanted to create Zion in the East. They call the East Indies as the Indische Zion, Zion in the East. They wanted to have that, the idea of the holy place in the Indies. And that drove their motivation. So the ministers, the Dutch ministers who sailed to the East Indies, then started to spread Calvinism to the indigenous people in the presence of Roman Catholicism that was already there for more than 50 years because of the Iberians. So think about all those competitions, right? Then, of course, as soon as the ministers established these churches among the indigenous people, the first thing that they had to do was make a church order. The church has to be governed. Now, think about this. 1602 was earlier than 1619. That's easy, right? The reason why I mentioned 1619 is the Synod of Dort. So the VOC predated the Synod of Dort. But then in the next 1.5 decades or so, the churches in the East Indies got established, and this started, they had to make the church order. In Batavia is now Jakarta. In Batavia, the church already established. Now, my next point here is to show how close the church order of Synod of Dort, 1619, and the church order of Batavia, 1624 are. They are almost identical. Well, we can understand that the ministers replicated what they learned from the Synod of Dort. Here, to maintain good order in the Church of Christ, necessary to have offices, the 4 offices, the gatherings, the teaching of doctrine, sacraments, ceremonies. These are all governed because the church in the East Indies, the Reformed Church in the East Indies, must follow exactly as what happened in the Netherlands. So they were governed that way. And of course, only ordained ministers were allowed to preach. Now, there were shortages of ministers, of course, in this vast area of land. And so the Dutch utilized what they already had in the fatherland: school teachers and visitors of the sick. So school teachers and visitors of the sick also sailed together with the VOC merchants to the East Indies, so that once they arrived in the destination, these people could lead worship, running the day-to-day, the Sunday by Sunday worship, but not preaching. The sermons must come from the ordained ministers. So the ordained ministers printed and reprinted their sermons to be read Sunday after Sunday after Sunday all throughout the islands. And because of that, I get my sources for my research. That's just exciting, right? So that's how I got most of my sources, right? Now, look at this comparison again. There are 4 kinds of offices: ministers of the word, doctors, of professors, elders, and deacons. That sounds very familiar to Calvin's Geneva too, right? So you can see that it spread. This started with Calvin's Geneva through the Netherlands to the East Indies, and you can see this is Article 3 in both church orders that they were given clear instruction here. So, next. The ministers of the word, as well as professors of theology, subscribe to the Confession of Faith of the Netherlands churches. That's Belgian confession, right? So it's interesting because in Dort, it only says Confession of Faith of the Netherlands churches. Ministers who refuse to do this shall de facto be suspended from their office by the consistory or classis until such time that they give a full explanation of this. If they obstinately persist in refusing, this shall be completely deposed from their office. That's Dort. When you look at Batavia, it says in 21 there, the ministers of the word of God, visitors of the sick, and the schoolmasters, you remember all those people, should abide with the confession of faith of the Dutch churches, the Belgian Confession, the Christian Catechism of Heidelberg Catechism, and the Synod of Dort. The three forms of unity were already used in 1624 in Batavia. Think about that. And that is the root of my Reformed Christianity until today. There's a lasting impact, 400 plus years. That's amazing, isn't it? Right? To me, studying history is really important, right? So now, what about worship? This is also interesting. In Dort, Article 67, the congregation shall observe, in addition to Sunday, also Christmas, Easter, and Pentecost, with the following days, since the circumcision of Christ, the ascension of Christ, and so on and so forth. It's still there. Now, in the East Indies, you can see Article 30, the congregation shall observe, besides the Lord's Day, Christmas, Easter, and Pentecost. So there was no mention about the circumcision of Christ and Ascension earlier in 1624, but later, Ascension Day was also added in Batavia, and Ascension Day continues until today. In Indonesia, it is public holiday. Ascension Day is always a Thursday. We don't go to school. Offices are closed. The first time, and a personal story, the first time I came to Calvin Seminary, Ascension Day was school as usual. In the evening, I called my mother, and I talked about that. My mother said, "Son, are you sure you go to a Christian school?" So go figure, right? And here, if you look at Article 69, this is Dort, in the churches, only 150 Psalms of David, the 10 Commandments, the Lord's Prayer, the 12 Articles of Faith, that's the Lord's Prayer, Song of St. Mary, Magnificat, Song of Zechariah, Benedictus, and Song of Simeon, Nunc Dimittis, shall be sung. It is left to the option of the churches whether to use or omit the song, O God, who art our Father. So now this goes back in the Netherlands, this goes back to the Datanus. If you are familiar with Petrus Datanus, the famous translator of the Genevan Psalms, all the 150 Psalms, plus some of these canticles. If you look at them, they are also resembling to what happened in Geneva toward the later part of Calvin's life. So if you look at the Psalter of Geneva published in the 1560s, then you started seeing these canticles also included. So you remember that in Geneva, Calvin insisted only to sing 150 Psalms in the metrical forms and a handful of these canticles. The Netherlands also adopted that, but when later, here in Batavia, we see in the appendix a further explanation, right? That it should be taught in the school, right? In the school, the youth of Dutch and foreign families, meaning the indigenous people, shall be trained in godliness, good manners, reading, writing, and singing psalms. Look at this. Singing psalms is part of the curriculum. Lovely. Heathen children, the non-believers, shall be drawn to school, each promising a part of a journey weekly, and suitable mind shall be further instructed in Christian religion and other sciences by a master or teacher under the minister's supervision. You see the hierarchy here. It's always the minister who has the authority. Preaching already prepared in Malay, that's what I was talking about, shall be copied, that's what I was talking about, and every minister and church officer shall have it, so all those printed sermons. The number of sermons shall be increased as necessary. First, the Gospel of Matthew shall be translated into Malay for reading in the congregation together with some psalms in rhyme for singing. over time, this shall be done in other languages as well. So you can see here, Malay was chosen. Malay was one lingua franca of the people in the region. Malay was chosen as the language for the church. The ministers should learn Malay and then printed their sermons in Malay. That's the sources that I'm using. But also you can see here the translation of the Gospel of Matthew is speculated, it's written here, right? Now, in actuality, the Gospel of Matthew was only translated in 1629. The Heidelberg Catechism, on the other hand, was translated in 1623. So the Catechism preceded the Bible. Go figure. 1623 and 1629. And then, of course, I'll talk a little bit more about that. The schoolmaster shall obey the curators and superintendent in all things according to his calling. He shall teach the young reading, writing, arithmetic, psalm singing, godliness, good manners, and so on and so forth. And he shall cause prayers to be recited and a psalm to be sung at the opening and closing of school, as well as mornings, evenings, and before and after meals. It's clear. It's there. Now, let's talk about the psalm singing. So the 1629. So this collection of songs was attached to the Malay translation of the Gospel of Matthew in 1629. Let's look at this. The Ten Commandments, sure, like what we just read, right? Then the Song of Zechariah. But then interestingly, the tune was set to Genevan 137. And then Gloria in Excelsis Deo, that's the song of the angels, set to Genevan 80. The Song of Simeon, we know that. That tune. The Song of Mary, the Magnificat. And then the Apostles' Creed, set to Genevan 23. The Lord's Prayer. Now, look at number 8 here. There is a Psalm 151. Professor Bosman knows about that. John Calvin would have flipped in his grave if he had heard about this. But you see here, there's continuity and discontinuity from Geneva to the Netherlands and what was brought to the East Indies. Now, when I studied this, the apocryphal Psalm 151 is really fitting because this psalm, and also in the Malay translation, it says, it is not found, Psalm 151 is not found in the Hebrew Bible, but it is found in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the Septuagint. It's written in Malay. As an explanation, right? And this tells the story of David in his older year, reflecting on what he did to Goliath and how God was with him in protecting him and then in defeating Goliath. So that psalm fits within this whole area. And then there's also the prayer for before the sermon, set to the tune written by Jan Uitenhove. The Song of Solomon, based on 1 King. And this is also another interesting piece, number 11. It is a medieval hymn that was never sung in Geneva, but sung in the Netherlands, and Dathenus inserted that. My theory is that because Dathenus used to be a monk, and he used to sing this hymn before he became Protestant. And so he inserted that, Christe qui lux est die, as Christ who is the light of day, and then it is set to the tune of Genevan Psalm 100. Genevan Psalm 100 is very famous. And then for prayer for before the sermon, set to Genevan 100, and the Genevan Psalm 100 itself in the collection of essays, right? So you can see here, very interesting and exciting things being brought to the East Indies as the starting point of Calvinism in the East Indies. Now, just for your entertainment, this is the church in my hometown. This is the church where my parents got married in. This is the church where I started my Christian life in. It's still standing. It was built in 1753, a little later. There's a story behind that. Look at this. This is the interior. What caught your attention to the right over there? The Baroque organ. That's how I fell in love with the organ music. Imagine me, 3-year-old, playing in the balcony. And so this is, yeah, I have to bring that. Anyways, that's my presentation. More questions, I'm sure. Questions, we have time. Professor Bosma.
Not a question, just an observation.
Please.
That order of school.
Yes.
That's the way I was, that was the order of school when I was a kid in the Netherlands.
Yes.
From 1st to 6th grade.
Yes. So it lasted all these years, all these centuries.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, the days like Ascension Day,
Mm-hmm.
we did not have, we had school in the morning, but in the afternoon,
Mm-hmm.
government trucks brought us home so we could go to church. In the afternoon.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that Pentecost is mentioned. I
Yeah.
mean, we still have Christmas and Easter,
Yeah.
but where is Pentecost and Ascension Day?
Ascension Day. Yes.
Just
It's lost. Yeah.
lost?
Yeah. 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 Professor Bolt. Yeah.
But my favorite Ascension Day story related to the city of Grand Rapids. I think it was the first semester I was here, or maybe the second year, I don't remember when, but I went down to Kingma's,
Oh.
which was at that time at
Mhm.
Boston and Kalamazoo,
Mm-hmm.
get some food. About 5 o'clock in the evening, and there's a big sign on the door. We are closed from 4 o'clock or whatever for Ascension Day.
Mm-hmm.
And it blew me away. I thought, I came from secular Canada, and there was no worry about that. But it was striking. Only in West Michigan, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. But today, I think when you go to Europe, the 10 days between Ascension Day and Pentecost, in French anyways, it's called Petite Vacances, so a small holiday where offices run at a shortened time, and also businesses and so on and so forth. And buses run at a different schedule. This is personal story. 2009, that's the 500th anniversary of Calvin's birth. I went to Geneva, not knowing, because I'd been living in America for too long, that my arrival there was Ascension Day. I thought that I could take the bus from the airport to my hotel. My budget was very limited, mind you. No buses were running. I had to take the taxi, because then I realized, oh, it's a small holiday. All those 10 days, buses run and trains run with a shortened schedule, even until today. Yeah, between Ascension Day and Pentecost. Yeah. Yes.
So you spoke about the vast powers that this
Mm-hmm.
held,
Yeah.
military presence,
Yeah.
like colonializing lands, like having political, judicial powers.
Yeah.
How did that work with Calvinism, which is very unique?
Thank you for asking that question. I'm teaching a PhD class about this semester. So that's in the thick of our conversation. Almost every day we meet, we struggle with that question. The tension and the interplay between power, money, because they came there for money. And Christianity and Calvinism in this case. The short answer, Paul, is that it's really a complicated matter. Now, let me explain the situation first, and then you think about it on your own. The VOC had all its power. It was given the full authority by the States General. Everybody who wanted to sail to the East Indies had to sign, and I still have a copy of the contract. You state your name, you state the date you board on the ship, you state what ship it is, and then you write your vow that you are going to obey everything that the VOC told you, and then you are not going against, because there's also regulation there also, right? You must make your oath. So that's already one big thing. Another thing is that all these workers, including the ministers and the school teachers and the visitors of the sick, they were the employees of the VOC. They were the employees of the VOC. They are on the VOC's payroll. Now, unwritten rule, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. And then you also have to sign it, right? So what I see in my study, especially from the theological and the ecclesiastical point of view, the ministers were really put in a very difficult situation where not just sometimes, most of the times, they have to compromise. Compromise is a bad word, but they must obey what the VOC told them. One example, I'm writing a paper right now about slavery. Yes, the VOC did employ slaves, and yes, the VOC did trade slaves. Slavery itself is one issue, trading of slaves is another issue. The VOC did both, right? Now, in this collection of sermons, I read the 8th commandment. You shall not steal. And the ministers preached that this is real. When you go to a different island and then you kidnap the children of the parents of those islands, and then you brought those children to a different island and sell them and enslave them, that is against the 8th commandment. To the indigenous people, the ministers preached that. Did the ministers know that the VOC employed slaves and traded slaves? Yes. So that's the reality. That's just one example. That's just one example of very difficult question that I am still thinking about writing this paper. Can you see that? Yeah, and this is just one area. This one area of struggle. So as where I now stand, this is what I explain to myself and to the students. When it comes for the relationship between the minister and the congregation, they are very sincere in terms of ministering and shepherding the congregation, the indigenous people. However, there's also this tension with the VOC that is unwritten but real for the ministers. So that's one side. But I also have records of other areas where the ministers were really speaking with both sides of their mouths, because they also employ slaves and they were also part of slave trading. They put their money in those trades. And that is another sad part of history that, of course, we cannot change, but that's just the reality of this situation, right? Because the VOC came with power. And Jeff, I think you have...
Yeah, I'm just leaning into that a little bit more. You've got the VOC with the power, you've got the ecclesiastical, and then I was noticing with the training of children, there was the Dutch,
Yeah.
the foreign, the
Yeah.
heathen.
Yeah.
What was the interaction, especially the church, with the indigenous
Yeah.
population? How
Yeah.
did they perceive them? Was there any sort of, what was it, missional?
Yeah.
How did they navigate power, the empire? And
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. So you can look at this from different angles, depending on who you are as a historian, right? If you are just a social historian with no foundation for theology, especially, and then you will say, okay, they just came with power. They take the wealth of the nation and then just take advantage of that. That's one side of it, right? Now, I see there is a real effort in bringing Reformed Protestantism to the people. But also at the same time, though, think about all the competitions that happened in Europe at the time of the Reformation. For the Calvinists, Calvinism is the only true religion, so to speak. Read Calvin's polemics with the Roman Catholics, with the Anabaptists, and so on and so forth, right? Now, there is a catechism that was translated from the Dutch into Malay. The title is The Way to Heaven, and that became the title of my book. I forgot to bring my own copy, but you can see it over there in the case. The Way to Heaven. The first question is, how do you get to heaven? Even before, what's your only comfort? The first question is, how do you go to heaven? The answer is by knowing this religion. You see? So that kind of competition, Jeff, right? That's also a conviction that what they bring here is really the one that really brings salvation to the people. So that motivates them to spread Reformed Christianity, Reformed Protestantism to the people. But at the same time, also don't forget the financial and the political competitions with the Iberians. They don't want to see Roman Catholicism grow. But whereas they were already about more than 50 years too late, right? So they really press on furthering Calvinism. Now, when you read, and I have the notes only for about 50 years, but it's 6 volumes already, of all the reports by the ministers in the East Indies that were brought back to Amsterdam. They would list every time, how many children they baptize on this Sunday, how many couples are married, how many people attend the service, and so on and so forth, right? So they are very proud of the progress, but of course progress is not always a linear graph. It's up and down and up and down. But all those reports also serve to show that they were successful. And the fact is that in the Moluccas, in the areas that I showed you there on the map, there's a big growth. In other parts of what is now Indonesia, it's more difficult because of the competition with Islam. Islam was already there in the 13th century. When you look at this 17th century, they were 400 years too late compared to Islam. So in the big islands like Java, Sumatra, Reformed Protestantism was not very strong. But in these islands, in the Moluccas, you can still see the strong presence of Reformed Protestantism. Yeah. Yeah, so all those dynamics, right? It's not just one area. They all intersect. Yeah. Professor Bosma, yeah.
What was the relation of the church then established in Indonesia to the church in the Netherlands?
Then or now? Then, okay, yes. Oh,
I asked that question
thank you.
because in the northern part of Brazil, where the
Yes,
West Indies was,
yes.
the converts and the churches among the Indians that were established, they were sent via ship to the classical meetings in Amsterdam.
Yes, rather similar, not exactly the same. The whole East Indies became Classis Amsterdam. The whole, the reports were sent to Amsterdam as part of the classical report. The whole East Indies was Classis Amsterdam. Yeah, that's why it's all governed, and then all the ministers must get their permit from the classes and so on and so forth. Yeah, so rather similar, but the people were not sent to the Netherlands. Yeah, yeah. So everything, all the baptismal records, following Calvin, that when you baptize your baby, the father must be present, and the names of the father and also the mother and the godparents, they were all written in the books of the church and then sent back to Amsterdam. Every single one of them followed very carefully. Yeah, yeah, it's Classis Amsterdam. Yeah, yeah. And so I also have the letters from the ministers in the East Indies to Amsterdam, and then the responses from Amsterdam back to the East Indies. It's all there. We can still study those. Yeah.
Elaborate on why the catechism was translated to something else.
Thank you very much. Yes, because you can see here the emphasis on the teaching, knowing the core of the Christian belief. To me, this also has to do with the competition against the Roman Catholics, because the Roman Catholics, the Jesuit missionaries, they baptized people, as many people as possible, because of the theological belief that the sacrament saves. Whereas for the Reformed, it's not the actual act of baptism, but we need to know, right? So the emphasis on the knowledge of Christian faith. That's why catechism. Well, 1623 was the translation of the entire Heidelberg Catechism. In 1611, I didn't bring this here, in 1611 there was already a short catechism. It's called the Letter of ABC. It is a primer. Basically, it's a primer. If you know, primer is the first book that school children used to learn how to read and write. But actually, there is also a catechism book. It was used for the children at school there. The primer, the first part is how to read your cursive and so on and so forth. And then, boom, the 10 Commandments. Then the Lord's Prayer. Then the Apostles' Creed. Then all the prayers that were listed there. They were all in those primers. Oh yeah, back to the earlier question that I didn't mention here is also that there is also advantage for the VOC to have the indigenous people become Christians, because they will become one of them. Now, think theology, think the Bible, think church teaching. The 10 Commandments is front and center. You can see even the translation of the Canticles. The first one was the 10 Commandments. That follows what happened in the Netherlands. Now, what is the 5th commandment? Professor Poult is smiling. Honor your father and your mother. In true Calvinistic fashion and the Heidelberg Catechism, who are your father and your mother? Not just your biological father and mother, people whom God places above you. Who are the people whom God placed above you? The VOC. They are your father and your mother. Don't go against them, because it's sin. You see, there's also an advantage from a theological point of view to bring in the indigenous people, as many as possible, to be part of this whole Christian family. But then, there's theology here. There's theology here. That's what happened.
Does that show up in any of the sermons of honor your father and your mother?
I have a whole paper already written about that. Yes, the answer is yes. Yeah, think about that. It's a complicated relationship between the church and the people and the company, and how religion plays. And also thinking about even the collection of the canticles there, right? You know, back to Psalm 151, David against Goliath. David won, right? It's because God is with David. And it is true all in the Reformation time, especially in the Netherlands, that the Netherlanders look at themselves as the Israelites with whom God sides. Always, right? And so this psalm fits within the entire structure of theology. Now, on February 23rd, 1605, so think about the charter in 1602, 1605, on February 23rd, 1605, a fleet of VOC ships attacked the fort in Ambon. Ambon is one of the forts in the Moluccas, where the Portuguese were already there. The Portuguese already established a fortress. The VOC came, defeated the Portuguese, drove them away, and took over the entire fort. The fort was named the Fort of Nossa Senhora, the Fort of Our Lady in Portuguese, and then just call it Fort Victoria, because we are victorious. Now, February 23 became an important holiday for the people in the East Indies because they celebrated the triumph of the Dutch against the Portuguese. There's a sermon that I also have that says this. We celebrate, and then the text was from the Psalm where David praises God for being with him, attacking their enemies. And the sermon says, today we celebrate together with the Dutch because God is with the Dutch just as God was with David. The Portuguese were here to be your rulers. They were bad. They ruled you with injustice and so on and so forth. Now we, the Dutch, come for you. And because we come with God, then you are part of this whole family. Guess what they did? You see, they all fit. They all fit. When you look at them, and not just as individual pieces, they go together. Yeah. Yes.
One of the questions that intrigues me always is, on the one hand, you've got what I would call the ideological use of the Israel theme.
Yeah.
All the things that happened in the Netherlands especially, and then later to some degree, although a little differently in North America. But another question I have is, apart from the ideological use of Calvinism, is there something in what is truly the religious and spiritual core of Calvinism, especially now in distinction from, say, Lutheranism, that is part of this global outreach? You don't have a Lutheran nation, Germany, or the Scandinavian. They have their own versions, but it's not like it's sort of bred in the bone to their faith. Is there something about Calvinism? Have you thought about that question?
Yes, thank you. Yes, well, I see that. Yeah, I see that there's something. One thing that is at the front of my mind right now is this: how Calvinism really teaches, right? Really giving a foundation, right? The recitation of the Apostles' Creed, that, especially in the case of the East Indies, it's important because of the other religions. Islam is a very strong, right? In the presence of the other religions, we, the Protestants, the Calvinists here, recite the creeds every Sunday because it gives us the foundation to be able to answer some questions. And that is still very strong until today. When you go to a Protestant church in Indonesia, it doesn't have to be a Reform or Presbyterian, these churches still recite the creed every Sunday. That I attribute to this presence of Calvinism from the 1600s. That's one thing. Another item that I always highlight is this. Even the structure of the liturgy that is rooted in Calvin's Strasbourg liturgy is this. All services start with the photum, Congregation of Jesus Christ. We start this service with a conviction that our help comes from God, the maker of heaven and earth. That to me is very beautiful. It speaks to the heart. rooted in the Psalms and empowering the people so that every time they come to worship, they are reminded that our strength comes from God, not from us. And especially in this difficult time where we as Christians are minority. So these are a couple that I can think of, John, that is really characteristic of Calvinism. Of course, other traditions also have that, but this is really emphasized, and this is still kept.
I agree.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Maybe one last question or comment? Professor Bosma, yeah.
Just a suggestion. Maybe you and the Brazilian students, you can do a similar thing on the West and East Indies for northern Brazil.
Yes, in my class, Alex is in my class, and we have a piece of that. Thank you. Thank you for the suggestion, yes. Yeah. Yeah, maybe we can continue this, Alex. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
The ministers that were under the VOC on their payroll and in that system where they had to make all these compromises, in all the sermons that you collected, were there any insights on how they navigated that with interpreting? Like the few that I
Great question. They just don't talk, well, for the most part, they just don't talk about the VOC side. They just talk about, so see, because if you read all the sermons without the background, these are really good sermons. You know, just really good, sincere sermons, good explication of biblical passages. They are. But they just don't talk about that side. Well, except for this one that is really a propaganda, the sermon for the 23rd of February. Anyways, thank you. If you have more questions, feel free to come and talk to me.